black belt bullied, a black janitor, to spar for fun. What happened next left everyone speechless. Welcome to Dusk Tales. Let's uncover what really happened. If you have ever watched a bully, slick with privilege and drunk on the silence of bystanders, push someone too far, then you are exactly where you need to be. This isn't just a story about a fight. It's a story about the quiet, unyielding strength that resides in the people we are trained to overlook. It's about what happens when a predator, circling what they believe to be easy prey, discovers that the quiet sheep they've been tormenting is actually a sleeping lion. The Apex Performance Center was a temple built to the god of sweat and steel. Its air, thick with the scent of rubber flooring and ambition, hummed with the rhythmic thud of leather on heavy bags and the sharp clang of iron plates. It was a place where bodies were sculpted, egos were inflated, and hierarchies were brutally clear. At the very top of this food chain was Kyle the King Thompson, with a jawline cut from granite and eyes the color of a winter sky. Kyle moved through the gym, not as a member, but as its reigning monarch. His black belt wasn't just a piece of cloth, it was a crown, and his father's name on the deed to the building was his divine right. At the absolute bottom of this pyramid, so low he was practically part of the foundation, was Samuel Jones. Samuel was the facility's janitor, a man in his late 50s, with shoulders slightly stooped from years of labor and hands that were calloused and careful. He was a ghost in gray overalls, materializing with a mop and a bucket, cleaning up the sweat and grime left behind by men like Kyle. He was by design invisible. The conflict began not with a bang, but with the casual cruelty of a kicked bucket. Samuel was mopping near the main sparring mat, the water sloshing with a gentle rhythm. When Kyle and his two acolytes, Matt and Derek, finished a session, Kyle, still buzzing with adrenaline, performed a flashy spinning hook kick for his friends, his foot connecting not with a phantom opponent, but with the side of Samuel's plastic bucket. Gray water erupted across the pristine white mat, a dirty tide sullying the sacred space. "Whoops," Kyle said, the word dripping with mock sincerity. His friends snickered, their laughter echoing in the vast open space of the gym. Samuel didn't react. He simply looked at the mess, then at the smirking faces of the young men who were half his age, but held all the power. He reached for his mop, his movements slow and deliberate, his face an unreadable mask. The absence of a reaction was, to Kyle, a greater offense than any angry retort could have been. It was a silent, infuriating refusal to play his part, to be the flustered, intimidated victim. Kyle wanted a show, and Samuel was denying him an audience. He watched the older man methodically soak up the spilled water, his back to them, and a venomous seed of irritation planted itself in Kyle's chest. This quiet man, this nobody, had somehow defied him by doing nothing at all. From that day forward, Samuel became Kyle's personal project, a target for a campaign of insidious, escalating torment. Kyle's cruelty was an art form, practiced with a surgeon's precision to maximize humiliation, while maintaining plausible deniability. It was the accidental nudge that sent a stack of freshly folded towels tumbling to the floor. It was the protein shake left to fester in a locker, until it soured, a problem for Samuel to discover, and dumbbells would be left precariously balanced on the edge of a rack, positioned to fall when Samuel's cart rumbled past. Each incident was followed by the same hollow, "my bad," or a dismissive shrug, all while his posse supplied a soundtrack of muffled laughter. Samuel, for his part, remained a stone wall of stoicism. He would simply sigh, a quiet exhalation of breath that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 similar indignities, and clean up the mess. He never complained. He never raised his voice. He never looked Kyle in the eye. He just endured. His silence was a mystery that gnawed at Kyle, chipping away at his carefully constructed sense of superiority. How could someone so insignificant, so powerless, refuse to be broken? Kyle couldn't comprehend that Samuel's resilience wasn't a sign of weakness, but of a discipline far deeper and more profound than any belt could signify. Inside Samuel's mind, behind the calm facade, A different world exists. As his hands methodically polished the glass of the trophy case, a case dominated by Kyle's grinning face and golden figures, his thoughts drifted. He remembered the biting wind of a foreign mountain pass, the sting of sweat in his eyes, not from a mop, but from a forced march. He remembered the absolute stillness required to remain unseen, the control over breath and heartbeat that meant the difference between life and death. He remembered a mentor, a man with eyes like ancient stones, who had taught him that true mastery wasn't about dominating others, but about mastering oneself. The loudest man in the room is the weakest, his mentor had said, his voice a low rumble. Strength is silence. Control. Let the storm rage around you, but you must be the eye. So Samuel endured the petty tempests, Kyle brewed, seeing them for what they were, the thrashing of an insecure boy who mistook aggression for power. But even the calmest eye of the storm cannot last forever. And the pressure on the dam of Samuel's patience was building with every calculated slight, with every jeering laugh that echoed off the polished chrome and mirrored walls of Kyle's kingdom. The escalation was inevitable, a dark crescendo composed by Kyle's ever-growing frustration. His audience of sycophants demanded new and more dramatic performances, and Samuel's unwavering composure was making him look foolish. The torment needed to become more direct, more personal. One afternoon, Samuel was cleaning the men's showers, the steam hanging thick in the air like a shroud. Kyle and his crew entered, their voices bouncing off the tiled walls. They didn't see him at first, hidden as he was in the last. They were loud, arrogant, recounting a sparring session where Kyle had, in his own words, demolished a visiting fighter from another gym. Then, Kyle saw the worn-out tips of Samuel's work boots beneath the stall door. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. He nodded to Matt, who promptly turned one of the shower heads on full blast, aiming the icy spray over the top of the stall, drenching Samuel in a sudden shocking cascade. Cold water soaked through his thin overalls, plastering the gray fabric to his skin. He stood up slowly, the water dripping from his graying hair into his eyes. For the first time, he met Kyle's gaze directly, and in that moment, Kyle saw not the cowed subservience he expected, but a flicker of something else in the older man's dark eye. It was a spark of cold, hard fire, ancient and dangerous. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the familiar mask of weary resignation. But Kyle had seen it. It was both thrilling and infuriating. Later that week, the final act of provocation was set. Samuel was buffing the floor of the main dojo, the machine humming a low, monotonous tune. It was late, the gym nearly empty save for Kyle's group, who were ostensibly stretching, but were actually waiting, their bodies coiled with anticipation. Kyle walked onto the freshly polished floor, his training shoes squeaking with insolence. He dragged his foot, leaving a long black scuff mark on the gleaming surface. "You missed a spot, old man," he said, his voice a low taunt. Samuel stopped the buffer, the humming dying into a heavy silence. He looked at the mark, then back at Kyle. He didn't say a word. "What's the matter?" Kyle pressed, stepping closer, invading Samuel's personal space. His friends fanned out, circling, cutting off any path of retreat. The air grew thick, charged with menace. "You spend all day here, watching us, watching real fighters. You must think you know something, sweeping up our sweat and blood. You must think you're better than us." Samuel remained silent, his gaze fixed on a point, just over Kyle's shoulder. His stillness was a rock against which Kyle's taunts crashed and broke. The lack of fear, the sheer refusal to be intimidated, finally pushed Kyle over the edge. This had to end. He needed to break this man, to see him crumble, to hear him beg. It was the only way to reassert the natural order of things. "I'll tell you what," Kyle declared, his voice booming in the empty dojo, a proclamation for all to hear. "I'm tired of your attitude. I'm tired of you looking at me. Let's see what you've got. You and me, on the mat. A little friendly spar, for fun." The words hung in the air, coated in a venomous sweetness. It wasn't a request. It was a command wrapped in a challenge, a public execution disguised as a sporting event. There was no way to refuse. The trap had been sprung. The word spread through the Apex Performance Center like a contagion. By the next morning, everyone knew the janitor had been challenged by the king. It wasn't spoken of in hushed whispers. It was discussed openly, with a kind of morbid glee. It was the ultimate spectacle, a public humiliation, a lesson in social hierarchy to be delivered with fists and feet. Kyle was the hero of the story they told themselves, the champion putting a strange, defiant old man back in his place. Bets were made, not on who would win but on how long Samuel would last. 30 seconds, a minute perhaps, if Kyle decided to play with his food. The gym's owner, Kyle's father, a man whose spine was made of money and nepotism, heard of the arrangement and gave it his tacit approval. He saw it as a harmless bit of sport, a way for his son to solidify his alpha status. He told the gym manager to make sure the insurance waiver is signed, his only concern being liability, not morality. Everyone expected Samuel to disappear. They expected him to collect his final paycheck and vanish into the anonymity from which he came. It was the sensible thing to do, the only logical response to the threat of a violent, public shaming at the hands of a trained martial artist in his physical prime. But Friday morning, Samuel arrived for his shift at the exact same time, his old lunchbox in hand. He punched his time card, gathered his supplies and began his daily routine as if nothing had changed. His presence was a quiet act of defiance that baffled everyone. He moved through the gym, a calm island in a sea of curious, pitying and scornful stare. He polished the mirrors, and in their reflection, he saw the members pointing and whispering. He emptied the trash cans, filled with discarded energy bar wrappers and the casual debris of people who never had to clean up after themselves. He felt their judgment, a palpable weight in the air, but his expression remained impassive, his movements economical and precise. Inside, however, the old lessons echoed. Do not fight the river, his mentor's voice whispered in his memory. Let it carry you. The moment of action will present itself. Patience is your shield, and timing is your sword. That evening, when Kyle's father approached him, clipboard in hand, Samuel simply nodded. The spar is set for 7 p.m., Thompson said, avoiding eye contact. A flicker of something, perhaps shame, perhaps annoyance on his face. Just a bit of fun to blow off some steam. You understand? Samuel took the pen and signed the waiver without reading it. His signature was not the shaky scrawl of a frightened man, but a series of firm, controlled lines. He handed the clipboard back, and for a fleeting second, his eyes met the owner's. In them, Mr. Thompson saw no fear, no anger, no plead. He saw only a deep, unsettling calm, a placid lake beneath which something immense and powerful lay dormant. Samuel finished his shift, cleaned his equipment, and went home. He did not prepare, he did not train, he simply ate his modest dinner, read a chapter from a worn paperback book, and went to sleep. He knew that this fight had been decided long ago, not by strength or by anger, but by character. The battle was already won. The only thing left was the performance. The atmosphere inside the Apex Performance Center, that night, was nothing short of a Roman Colosseum. The air, usually just thick with sweat, was now heavy with a predatory excitement. The usual gym-goers were there, but so were their friends, and friends of friends. Word had turned the Spar into a must-see event. They gathered around the main octagonal mat, their phone screens held up like modern-day torches, ready to capture the impending sacrifice. They were a mob, hungry for a spectacle, their collective gaze a physical force, pressing down on the empty space. Kyle, the king, made his entrance to a chorus of cheers and backpats. He was in his element, a gladiator born for the arena. He wore pristine white G-pants, and was shirtless, his torso a chiseled map of muscle. He bounced on the balls of his feet, his movements sharp and explosive, a display of coiled power. He shadowboxed, his fists a blur, cracking the air with sharp report. He was performing for his court, soaking in their adoration, his ego swelling to fill the entire cavernous room. Then, a side door opened, and Samuel Jones walked in. The buzz of the crowd faltered, replaced by a ripple of snickers and outright laughter. The contrast was almost comical. Samuel wore no special gear, He had on the same simple gray work pants he wore every day, and a plain dark blue t-shirt. He wore no wraps on his hands, no protective headgear. He looked not like a fighter, but like a man who had wandered into the wrong room, a lost lamb entering the wolf's den. He walked slowly, deliberately, toward the mat, his worn work boots making a soft rhythmic scuffing sound on the floor. He ignored the jeers, the pointing fingers, the sea of illuminated screens aimed at his face. His expression was placid, his eyes focused, not on Kyle, not on the crowd, but on some distant internal point of focus. He stepped onto the mat, the soft canvas yielding slightly under his weight, and stood there, his hands loose at his side. He was perfectly still, a statue of quiet dignity amidst a circus of mockery. Kyle smirked, a picture of supreme confidence. "Ready to learn your lesson, old man?" he sneered, his voice loud enough for the entire crowd to hear. Samuel didn't answer. He simply gave a slow, small nod. The gym manager, acting as an impromptu referee, stepped into the center. "All right," he said, his voice uncertain. "This is a friendly spar. 3 rounds, 5 minutes each. No illegal strikes. Protect yourselves at all times. Touch glove." Kyle aggressively tapped his gloves against Samuel's open, unadorned hands. The manager stepped back, a nervous look on his face, and yelled, "Fight." The bell, a shrill and piercing sound, echoed through the gym, signaling the start of the slaughter. Kyle exploded from his corner like a compressed spring. He was pure, blinding aggression, a whirlwind of motion designed to intimidate and overwhelm. He opened with a series of lightning-fast jabs, not meant to land, but to establish range and force Samuel onto the defensive. He followed with a high, snapping roundhouse kick, a signature move that had won him tournaments. It sliced through the air with a vicious whoosh, aimed directly at Samuel's head. The crowd gasped, anticipating the brutal impact, but the impact never came. Samuel didn't block, he didn't retreat, he simply shifted his weight, a subtle, almost imperceptible movement, and the kick sailed harmlessly past his ear, missing by a whisper. Kyle, thrown slightly off balance by the unexpected miss, reset immediately and launched another attack, a furious 3-punch combination. A jab, a cross, another jab. Each punch was a piston of muscle and bone, and each punch met nothing but empty air. Samuel swayed, his upper body moving like a reed in the wind, a gentle, fluid motion that kept him just outside the reach of Kyle's knuckle. He hadn't taken a single step back. He was simply not there when the attack arrived. The crowd's initial bloodthirsty roar began to quiet. The snickers and jeers died in their throats, replaced by a confused murmur. This wasn't the clumsy, terrified old man they had expected. They were witnessing something they couldn't understand. Frustration began to curdle Kyle's confidence. He was the star, the black belt, the king. This janitor was supposed to cower, to fall, to bleed. He wasn't supposed to move like a goat. He growled, a sound of pure animal rage, and abandoned his technique for raw, unrestrained fury. He charged forward, throwing a wild haymaker, a sloppy telegraphed punch born of pure ego. It was a mistake, a fatal one. As the punch barreled towards him, Samuel moved. It was the first truly offensive motion he had made, but it wasn't an attack. He stepped into the punch, flowing with its energy. His left hand came up, not to block, but to gently guide Kyle's incoming arm. His right hand found Kyle's elbow. His feet pivoted. It was not a show of strength, but of physics, a perfect redirection of momentum. The crowd saw only a blur. One moment, Kyle was a charging bull. The next, he was airborne. His own forward momentum converted into a spiraling upward arc. He seemed to hang in the air for an impossible second, his face a mask of pure shock. Before gravity reclaimed him, he landed on the mat with a sickening thud that echoed through the now silent gym. The wind was driven from his lungs in a pained, desperate gasp. The king had been dethroned, not by a punch or a kick, but by a whisper of movement and a lifetime of discipline. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound in the Apex Performance Center was the ragged, desperate sound of Kyle trying to suck air back into his lung. The sea of cell phones, which had been so eager to capture a humiliation, was now frozen, its owners' faces slack with disbelief.
They had come for a public execution, and had instead witnessed a quiet resurrection. Samuel stood over Kyle's prone form, his posture unchanged. There was no triumph in his eyes, no satisfaction, no "I told you so." He simply looked down at the younger man, his expression one of solemn finality, as if observing the natural conclusion of a long foretold event. Kyle, gasping on the mat, his body screaming in protest and his mind reeling from the sheer impossibility of what had just occurred, finally managed to push himself up onto his elbows. He stared up at Samuel, his arrogance shattered, replaced by a raw, naked confusion. "How?" he wheezed, the single word a confession of his complete and utter defeat. Samuel looked down at him, and for the first time, he spoke. His voice wasn't loud or angry. It was calm, measured, and carried the weight of a quiet authority that filled the entire room. "The lesson is over," he said simply. With those 4 words, he turned his back on his defeated opponent, on the stunned crowd, on the entire spectacle. He walked off the mat, his worn work boots making their soft, steady sound on the floor. He didn't look back. He walked over to the corner where he had left his things, picked up his mop and his yellow bucket, and headed towards the locker rooms to continue his shift, leaving a kingdom in silent, bewildered ruins behind him. The silence that followed Samuel's departure was a heavy, suffocating blanket. It was broken only when Kyle's father, his face a storm of fury and embarrassment, rushed onto the mat, followed by Kyle's now hesitant friends. They helped their fallen king to his feet, but the illusion of his royalty was gone forever. He was just a boy who had been humbled, his crown of arrogance lying in pieces on the canvas. The next day, the gym was a different place. The usual bravado was gone, replaced by a quiet, contemplative atmosphere. The story of the Spar had mutated overnight. It was no longer a joke, it was a legend. Mr. Thompson, forced by the sheer, undeniable evidence of his son's public dismantling, launched a quiet investigation into the man who mopped his floors. What he found shook him to his core. Samuel Jones was not just a janitor. His records, sealed for decades, revealed a past he had worked hard to leave behind. He was a former master sergeant in the Special Forces, a hand-to-hand combat instructor for an elite unit, whose name was still classified. He held master-level rankings, not in 1, but in 3 different martial arts: Judo, Aikido, and Krav Maga, disciplines that prioritized efficiency, control, and the redirection of force over flashy aggressive displays. He had left that life of violence and intensity, seeking only peace and anonymity, a quiet place to live out his days. He hadn't been hiding in plain sight. He had been resting. Mr. Thompson found Samuel in the boiler room, methodically cleaning a filter. The owner, a man used to commanding and being obeyed, found himself at a loss for words. He offered an apology, clumsy and inadequate. Then, seeing an opportunity, he offered Samuel a job, the head instructor position. "You could run this place," he said, his voice laced with a newfound, desperate respect. "Name your price." Samuel finished wiping his hands on a clean rag, and looked at the wealthy man who had allowed his son's cruelty to fester. He gave a small, sad smile. "Thank you, sir," he said, his voice gentle, "but I am not a teacher anymore. I'm just here to do my job." He declined the offer, and in doing so, demonstrated a final, profound lesson in character. He didn't want the power or the prestige. He had not acted for reward or recognition. He had acted simply because a line had been crossed. From that day on, no one at the Apex Performance Center overlooked the janitor. The whispers that followed him now were not of mockery, but of awe and respect. The gym members started clearing their own weights. The floors stayed cleaner. A quiet, unspoken understanding had settled over the place. They had learned that true strength wasn't measured in the size of your muscles or the number of trophies on a shelf. It was measured in dignity, in resilience, and in the quiet courage to stand your ground. Remember Samuel Jones. Remember that the world is full of quiet people who carry incredible stories and hidden strength within them. The loudest voice in the room is rarely the most powerful. True respect is earned, not through intimidation, but through unwavering character. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that the underdog can and will have their day.